let this shit slide and get your lick back. And get your lick back. Get your lick back. If a nigga owe you something, ain't no chit chat. Better stay up out the way, don't get your shit splat. Stop letting this shit slide and get your lick back. And get your lick back. I feel like I'm JX. J-Way. I'm a perfectionist. Adderall got me restless. I'm gone. Run with a wild crew, they get reckless. Young boy, come up off that neck. Give me that. To the trends. See you, Lee, be the best.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Corner to Copa. Our last show was February 1st, and I feel like we were kind of like, been a slow start to the free agency. Not a lot going on. We got a couple relievers, but they have since then. We've seen some fireworks over the last 2 weeks maybe. So we definitely have a lot to talk about. We've had a couple shows, but the last show was a spring training preview. But Coach, how are you feeling? I feel like you were kind of like you were frustrated with the amount of activity and things were slow. Has things changed for you? How are you feeling at this current juncture?
You know, as everyone reports now, and they're starting to get their feet wet down there in Lakeland. It's been, two names. Ironically, one name I think we were all kind of talking about last year and during the end of the, stretch run last year as well, in Verlander. So that was one interesting one, but I almost don't even know which one was more unexpected between him and Framber, just because once we got to the offseason, it seemed like the public opinion for Tiger fans, at least, almost flipped entirely on JB. Like, we don't want him. No, he's probably retired, this, that, and the other. But I tell you, man, the nostalgia of that alone was, in my core, going back to, 20 years ago when he was a rookie, basically, and leading the team to the World Series, and after years of futility, man, that was like a full circle moment, man. Like, forget 12 years ago when it was JB and Max Annabelle. We know that all too well. But yeah, it's this pitching staff is suddenly, arguably amongst who you're talking to, top 2-3 in baseball for sure. But of course, that's with knowing that we won't have Olson and Job for the year, which would have been an insane depth. Honestly, that would have been the best depth by far out of baseball, hands down. We could eat an injury or two and still be fine, but lo and behold, we got the carryover from Joe, which we expected, but Olson being the bigger news. I think both signings then became necessary, not just luxury, but necessary to kind of counter the lack of, or really, I don't want to say lack, he didn't sign anyone on offense this year, so for a bat. So that's the way he went. He went for pitching over offense, and I'm hoping that some of these guys that were, a little up and down last year and hurt can kind of elevate their game to offset some of that struggle we saw, and maybe not rely on having to go out and break the bank for someone at the deadline, but maybe just round out that offense.
Yeah. So let's rewind a little bit. So like I said, the last show we did was February 1st. And the only hot news we really had at the time was figuring out whether or not Skubal was going to get his $32 million. The first reports were that whether or not he got it would depend upon whether or not we went out and spent any more money on any mid-level guys. The Giolito, who I think is still out there. Zach Gallen, guys, and Bassett as well. So guys of that nature. So on the day that the arbitration meeting happened, we get an announcement saying that we signed Framber Valdez. Now I think I had jokingly thrown it out there as, hey, he's still out there, former Astro, played with A.J. Hinch. We kind of laughed it off. I couldn't genuinely say that it was a possibility, especially considering what he was going to be asking for and the fact that they were trying to hold on to, $12 million from Skubal. So how are we going to go out and spend a long-term deal on Framber? But like I said, on the eve of figuring out whether or not Skubal would be signed, we go out and break the bank. We spend, the AAV, as you can see, is $38 million, which is 18 this year. And then the $20 million signing bonus is deferred until 2030. And then he'll make 38 next year. And then after 2027, he'll actually be able to opt out. But ultimately, way more money than we thought we would be spending, especially if Skubal was going to get his 32. In the end, Skubal gets his 32, and then probably just a week ago, and you threw it out there. I can't remember if it was in the February first episode, but you said, "Hey, Job's out. We don't know what's going on with Olsen per se." We later find out what's happening with Olsen. You say, "Hey, why not a Verlander reunion?" I personally said, with the amount of money that we've been spending, Alex Cobb, $19 million or whatever it was, we can afford what Verlander's asking for. So it made me wonder, does he genuinely want to come back? If the money is right, why isn't it happening? You jokingly said, Kate Upton may not want to move back to Detroit for a year. Yeah. But what was your thought process immediately after the Justin Verlander signing became official? I know what my thoughts were, but where were you at when you thought of that?
I mean, at first it was shock. I think for a lot of us that are of 30 and older that grew up in his rookie year or kind of came into the organization of winning times, I'll say, with him. But I think I was really wondering, and even the Framber, once the numbers and terms were high level release, I was interested to see what it was. And, I was, okay, so Framber basically has an opt out. It's still kind of a 2-year deal. That's pretty much fit Harris's MO for guys that he has signed more than 1 year. It's really only been 2. Yeah. Sure, we get him for an extra third potentially. That's, I think, more of a safety net depending on what happens with the new CBA probably. But with the opt-out, though, still protects him, kind of. So even if he does, he would earn basically 70 of that 115 from Detroit with that signing bonus. So it's 35 a year is not, chump change at all. But the Verlander, immediately upon signing, it was, wow, where was this 3 months ago? Like, to your point, we didn't know what Olsen was doing. Job's traction to rehab and recovery and getting back 100%. And I think we've kind of stumbled upon a little bit of a theme here from the front office. If there's a big problem injury-wise with the player, they just go quiet about it for weeks because in the formal press conference, I'm going to fast forward to the media day down there in Lakeland last week after the 2 signings. They gave him a day or 2 to get settled in and everything. And Justin was very candid. He said, day 1 of free agency, I called Chris, I called AJ, and he called everyone and said, I want back. In his press conference in Lakeland said, I want to come home. What do we need to do to make that work? So, and essentially Chris said, we don't have the innings for you. Now, mind you, that's October, November, and Olsen re-injured or aggravated that shoulder that it was rehabbing in October, and they just didn't know what was going to happen until he had surgery practically right before spring training. And then within a few days, that's when they realized, it was way worse than they had anticipated, pretty much knocked him out for the year. So they're like, well, we've got the spot now, and he's still there, which, seeing the terms, he's only getting $2 million base with all that deferred money on the back end at the end of the decade. So that made the most logical sense that what JV said was true, because if it really was about the money, we would have seen 1 year 15, 1 year 18, you know what I mean? Or just loaded with incentives or some type of signing bonus deferred, a little bit different than the way they did it now. They just straight up deferred most of his salary for a low cap hit. But dude, it's just keep him healthy. That's all I care. Let's just, get through the season with them and get into the playoffs, and let's maybe hope here that, collectively we can see JV and the Tigers win a World Series for our own, nostalgia's sake.
Yeah. I mean, Reese Olsen basically the reason why he didn't get surgery immediately is because he was attempting to, rehabilitate it. And once they realized that he wasn't going to be able to go, he knew that either way he was going to miss the entirety of the season, whether whether he had the surgery in October, November, or waited until March or whatever. But or not March, because he's already had the surgery. So but it's kind of crazy to think that I guess it's fortunate that he waited around so long, because it was essentially days before spring training and he still hadn't signed anywhere. So, he must have been hell bent on coming home, because I would assume he could have found another, suitor between now and, before the time that we called and said, "Hey, we need you now." I guess he could have sat put for a while. I guess he didn't. It could have been like a light, a diet retirement before. Because I just think that him waiting on Reese Olson to shut down it doesn't seem like it went literally like that. It seems like he just said, "Well, I'll just stay put," and it push comes to shove, I'll find a home somewhere. I'm Justin Verlander. So, but immediately I thought, for one, they could have easily just said, "Well, we'll just go with Anderson. We'll go with what's the young guy, Melton." They could have easily settled on that, or a Montero. But I think that them taking the initiative to go out and get a Justin Verlander lets me know how serious they are about winning this year. And it only makes sense and is a full circle that they make a heavy push at winning the World Series when you bring back a player to his caliber. And I think that me personally, I think that that the dynamic that he's going to have with Framber, who he played with, and with Skubal, I think it could be influential for the future. For even Skubal is concerned that, hey, they're obviously pretty serious about trying to win. They went out and got a guy that is good enough to be my predecessor. So to me, it eliminates some of the will they spend money, because they spent $85 million real quick. The 32 with Skubal, the 38 with Framber. Obviously, that's deferred. And then you spent 15 on Verlander, also deferred, but money that you still had to put down. Still had to put the money still is signed and delivered. Do you feel like this changes the outset as far as Ilitch opening up the wallet and just the direction that he wants to take the team?
From the traditional sense of what we've been used to seeing over most of our born life, it's nowhere close, really. No. His dad spent way more than, not even at the peak, but right before that when JV was a rookie, basically that 06, 07, 08 run with Pudge and Kenny Rogers and those guys, he spent, but it wasn't a ton compared to the 2012 through 2017 run when they were loaded. Basically, the poor man's version of the 90s wings pre, salary cap in the NHL. But as of right now, it's more than what he's done for sure. You could add up the last 2-3 years and add it together, and it's still 3-4x more than probably what he's spent collectively. But compared to the landscape of baseball, he hasn't really spent too much. If I would say yes, if Framber was like a 5-year deal, that would be a commitment to stabilizing the rotation in the event that.
Would you have been more comfortable with him with Framber being like 32 years old? Would you have been comfortable with 5 years?
5 if he had the opt out after 3, but if we're not going to spend on bats, you're going to have to spend somewhere. And then we've given a lot of I almost want to call them like micro contracts, 1-2 year deals. Like Skubal, I don't really count as, it counts the payroll, but it's arbitration. They were going to pay it no matter what, whether they won or lost. So it would have been 19.5 versus 32. So that's kind of really moot at that point. But the Framber AAV was by far the biggest surprise because we had noted how fairly cheap he had been, other than paying guys that are 30 and older on the pitching side, but which I feel like is a weird anomaly on everything that's going on. But I will say yes when he starts to lock in some of the core guys that are non-pitchers, your Dinglers, your Carpenters, your Riley Greens. Those are all coming up here in the next 2 years. And coming up next year, granted, the improbable lockout coming up probably. Torkelson too, because he's going to be up, I think, off of team control too. So they're going to have a lot of decisions that will help either prove that the spending with Framber and whatnot, those guys are valid, or if he continues the same, prove it kind of approach, 1 year prove it deal. So I think he's maybe 1 foot in. Yes, but no would be my summarization on that.
Yeah, it may just be a tease, but that's why I erred on the side of caution when they said, well, if they lose the arbitration deal, don't expect them to spend any money. To go from that to spending $100 million, it's a little bit different of a report, which is why I was like, we'll see. But yeah. Let's get to the first break, and then we'll start talking about spring training. All right. So now that the spring training is officially started, we get to see some of these guys in the flesh, in the physical, and see where they're at. One of the hot topics that is being talked about is Thayron Liranzo, and coming off a pretty rough year where he was kind of flirting with the 200 average. It was pretty exciting to see that he came in at 35 pounds lighter, and just get a chance to. They had an opportunity to talk to him about how. This was last year was his first taste of kind of struggling and, just really feeling the effects of, being pretty much a full-time catcher and things of that nature. So, it was good to see that he took it upon himself. I mean, the catcher is a very physically demanding position. So to lose 35 pounds, I guess it's just kind of a testament to his work ethic and him wanting to improve, because he is only 22 years old, and he's added to the 40-man roster. So he's going to have to, prove himself at this point. They pretty much ate up a spot, and it wasn't coming off the strongest of, results. But, what are your thoughts about the physical change that he's made?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a couple of different ways they were approaching that based on how they see him playing out position wise. Because as you've done a great job over the last year and a half, especially last year with some of these newer Rule 5 guys that popped up that were just like, we really cannot afford to let this potentially slip through for guys that have maybe been in the system for a while and just have not been able to crack the everyday, the parent club lineup, whether they're lifers at AAA, which there generally usually are a lot in minor league baseball, guys that we know, like our own, probably the most legendary one of all, Mike Hess, who's now the manager down there in Toledo, he played less than probably under 75 games in the major league level, but he played like 8-9 years in Toledo. But no, I think that's and frankly it helped run out their farm system too. So you kind of trim some I don't want to say trim fat, but you kind of drop some guys that haven't really panned out or shown much promise for these guys that all of a sudden kind of came out of nowhere that were in your back pocket and were on the radar. Now at least if they don't somehow crack it, they're another potential trade chip in a deal, whether it's the trade deadline or this off season, to help make them better, because we do know, as you've done a very good job pointing out, they all play the same kind of catcher first DH spot, and we're kind of log jammed on that. So he may force a decision by front office, be like, yo, if he stays hot, we may have to do something. We can't keep him down there and probably Double A, where I'm assuming he's there. They'll start most likely between Lorenzo and Briseño. But there were some other positions of note too that I know we're going to touch on here that are intriguing to say the least. But I think too, this could be, even though he's got more team control, to your point about those two guys, Rogers could be bumped out earlier than we thought before his end of his team control expires. So yeah, they're in a good spot in that regard. So it's a good problem to be in, where if you've got, one stud catcher right now, a team friendly guy with Rogers, and potentially two other guys behind him.
Yep, and speaking of catchers, we finally got some reports from Scott Harris about his thoughts on Eduardo Valencia, who's somebody that we saw the statistics, but he was kind of a mystery as far as who he was and why he's kind of been, why he hasn't really been talked about. But Scott Harris did acknowledge that he's raked all the way through the system. He's dealt with injuries over the last, I think he's had Tommy John surgery, but he's been with the system since 2018, I believe. He was an international signing. So he's had the opportunity to play with a lot of different players through the system. They said Kerry Carpenter and Melton, obviously, but he's a guy that the players, although his skills are still developing as they do, slowly with catchers, but he's a guy that pitchers definitely like to throw to, and he's seen a lot of our system. He's seen a lot of our system. You play catcher, from 2018 on to now. You've seen some things. So he's got a lot more experience than people might think. But yeah, Scott Harris definitely acknowledged that he's, been raking, and, I've seen some bold, as far as some hot takes as, that he'll be the DH moving forward pretty soon. And I think you said also that you've been seeing some reports. Who were the players that you had said, who people had said they want to see called up in the near future? Was it Lorenzo was one of them?
Oh yeah, it was almost either between Briseño or Lorenzo, just for the DH spot. And I think the weird projection from one of these websites or whatever was that they would basically be promoted to hit against left-handers kind of full-time, but being a part-time DH in that aspect. And I got to think, I'm like, well, you kind of log jammed already between, Torque, if he doesn't play first, he's going to be in the lineup hitting. So that means he's DHing. And in the days Carey's out in the field, he's DHing. So I kind of don't really know where those enough or amount of those at-bats would come at the DH spot for either of those guys, barring injury, of course.
Yeah. I think it's a little soon as far as Briseño and Lorenzo are concerned. And then there's a few other guys that are kind of in the way of that. But and we talked about it online. I think everybody gets eager to see something new, especially when there is a deficit in the hitting department. As of right now, I think your DH, lefty specialist is Jahmai Jones, unless he falls off. But we'll see about that.
And that'd be crazy to bench Torque for when a lefty's on the mound. Like, that would be absolutely wild. That would be almost a vote of no confidence. Because he'll sit sometimes against righties here and there, but lefties, there should be no reason he should be sitting against lefties. And if you are for one of those two guys, there's something else going on. I would just, generalize it like that.
Yeah. I mean, Lorenzo is a switch hitter. So I can kind of see that, but Briseño's lefty. I don't know what his splits are against lefties, but I think that's down the road. I think Briseño's has a better chance of overtaking Jake Rogers at the catching position before dethroning Torkelson. Because Torkelson pretty much plays every single day. barring, a super slump where they just want to give him a day off. So,
Yeah.
because he displaced Colt back off of first into a utility role, that he was so comfortable in that, first base slot. But something interesting that I saw was Riley Green kind of speaking about his hitting approach. And he basically just said that he's hoping to, let me see if I can pull it up here. Basically said he's swinging for the fences every time. Let's see here. It's right here. So he said, new approach. If you have 2 strikes with a runner on second, maybe not try to hit a homer 5,000 feet. Let's maybe choke up. He said it showed last season that I was trying to hit a homer every single time. So obviously when it first came about and we were talking about, and he brought up, and somebody brought up the strikeouts, his initial response was, no one cares about strikeouts. He since then, after a full offseason, and we talked about it, we said, let's see where his mind is at after a long, because the dog days of summer, a long 162 game season, not only are you physically tired, but you're also mentally tired. So maybe at that time he was just kind of tired, it was getting to him. So after getting an opportunity to think about it and really take some reflection, he admitted, hey, I was trying to hit a home run every time. I was swinging for the fences. Maybe I should choke up a little bit, shorten the swing, and see how that affects his approach. So do you get any confidence or do you at least appreciate the fact that he's verbally, we'll see how it translates on the field, but do you feel better about this response over the last?
I mean, that's the same life advice, skill advice you get from middle school, high school, all the way through coaching levels in baseball. With 2 strikes, you choke up, you move up a little bit in the box so you can cover more potentially, and you just try and make contact. We'll see. I mean, that's going to be such a hard thing to track. That I'm going to leave that for some of the other online social media guys that do spend more time breaking down video that have that kind of time to see, after 90 days or whatever, if that's the case. But you like you said, you got to put that application into practice, and we'll see. I'm sure, but it's a wait and see kind of deal. So, and again, there's gonna be other factors into it. If they start pitching him differently and he's still striking out at a good rate or a high rate, it could be other factors. Maybe they've kind of figured him out a little bit more, or spots to avoid in key counts where he did crush balls for extra base hits and run production last year. So there's some factors in there that go into that. But if we see him physically choking up on the bat on a regular occasion with 2 strikes, with or without runners on, and doing things a little bit differently than he would in any other non-2 strike count, then yeah, I would say that he did put that into practice, spring training heading the season. But we'll see. I would just like to see some more contact and a little more patience. If he goes deeper into at bats and he's still striking out, then at least you can tell tangibly there that effort is there. It's just not, the outcome isn't there. So,
yeah, and we can't forget that this guy was a Silver Slugger last year, so he didn't have too shabby of a season, but we can see some improvements in the way of a better approach with 2 strikes, and certainly being able to convert with runners on, that's always important, especially from the middle of your lineup. So yeah, it's important. All right. Outside of that, it appears to be all but certain that Colt Keith will be the everyday third baseman as of now. It looks like they have McGonigal taking some reps all over the infield, but focusing on that same hot corner position. But it would not be a spring training in Detroit if somebody didn't move to a different position. And the popular name right now is Jace Young, moving over to first base. Of course, he was originally a second baseman. And then once Cole Keith was, which is ironic in itself, because it was caused due to Cole Keith. Now Cole Keith isn't at second because of Gleyber Torres. He was, Young was moved over to third base, and now will be taking a lot of reps at first base. Last year that was Colt and Justin Henry Malloy, but now it is Young. I have my theories as to why this is happening, but what are your thoughts as to why Young is taking reps at first?
I'm gonna try and guess what you primarily think. Do you have like more than like one reason? Is it like a culmination, like a couple small things?
It's a couple of different things. It's not one thing in my mind.
I'm gonna summarize it. I'm gonna try and guess and summarize it. I think they're doing this with the intent, not with the intent, but it was almost like a protection in the event that Torkelson does go down, either due to injury or he ends up not re-signing when his team control is over, and they have a legitimate potentially first baseman to replace him. Then they're not just left scrambling. Otherwise, if they didn't, per se, in theory, you now have no backup traditional first baseman legitimately behind him, and you still don't have an everyday third baseman. That's a problem on your corner infield if you don't have an established player or even identified in your 40-man for either of those two spots for a playoff team last 2 years. That's a pretty big gap to have.
Yeah. So you definitely touched on a few different things. For one, I think that they still have they still see some value in him, and he was a first round draft pick, and he's played with the Tigers for parts of 2 different seasons. Now we've talked about it throughout the summer. He's kind of getting pushed out of that third base position by your Max Andersons, your McGonagalls, your Cole Keith is probably going to be, for all intents and purposes, for right now, the everyday third baseman. So they're looking for other opportunities to give him reps. We know that Eduardo Valencia, Briseño, Lorenzo, these guys are on the the young end, working their way up in by way of first base. But once you get past Torkelson, there's really not a lot of right now guys. Like initially that was Cole Keith, of course, but he's transitioning to third. Malloy is no longer here, so your traditional backup first baseman, if Keith is your everyday third baseman, you really don't have one. So yeah, it only makes sense that if you're trying to find opportunities to get Young, in the game throughout the spring training, stuff like that, it only makes sense to move him over to first, because we don't have if Torque goes down tomorrow, Briseño's is not even on the 40-man roster. You really only have Lorenzo and Valencia, and they're probably not, they're probably not comfortable with that as of now. If Young hasn't hit great, but he has played. He played the playoff run in 2024, and then he played off and on last year. So he at least has experience at the major league level. So this is the last stop. I still think this is the last stop for Young, because there is a lot of competition at third base. But I think that's where you're going to see him play a lot, because Torkelson's the everyday first baseman out the gate, so you're not going to see him for innings upon innings in spring training. You're going to see a lot of other guys. So I think you're going to see a lot of Young at this point. So it also will boost.
Correct me if I'm wrong, for Young, wasn't he a positive plus defender at third base, graded originally? Like a plus defender, I thought.
Yeah, I think he was around outs above average.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, outs above average, maybe 0 or 1. He wasn't I don't think he was a negative at third base.
Then that does make sense too, though, because we have really lacked in some general infielding. So that I thought for a moment, didn't mean to cut you off, I thought he was a fairly decent defender. And I think that is also a minor underlying aspect to trying him out at first and maybe hitting, lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. Whoops, I was trying to pull it up.
Because that was the whole preface of Sweeney still hanging on by a thread, is that he has a better than average glove, which is really his only, remaining calling card left at the moment. But
yeah. So this was his number. This obviously is in limited experience, but third base, 1 out above average. So not bad considering this was only his second full second partial season at a brand new position. He's been a second baseman his entire career. So I think the transition shouldn't be too difficult. He's not the most fleet of foot, so he kind of fits. He certainly fits the build and athleticism of a first baseman. 6 foot, 225, or that 205. Yeah, 205. So pretty solid guy. But if you can hold your own at third base, then you should be decent at first base. But it was never the defense was never the problem for him. As you know, it's always been the bat. You can't hit 106. You can't. Your OPS, your on base. It doesn't have your on base. It just has the OPS. It's 342, and you see the majority of that comes from walks. The walk rate is off the charts, but I just throw you strikes if you're not gonna hit. So, oh no, it does have the on base. The on base is 315. Yeah. Not bad, but as you can see, vast majority of it is via walk. So me personally, he is, at the top of my list of guys that I'm paying attention to, because they're continuing to emphasize, he's still on the 40 man. They're continuing to move him around and try to give him every opportunity to play. So to this day, and once again, you're a corner infielder, got to hit for power. He does not have a home run at the major league level. He's never struggled to hit home runs at the minor league level, but we know that the gap has never been as big between AAA and the major leagues, and he is a poster child for that. So, Other than that, any other headlines that you have seen thus far from spring training? It's still early. We haven't. By the next time we do a show, we'll have some games under our belt to be able to speak on, because we can look at batting practice and bullpen, sets all we want, but until we get in front of, the other team, there's only so much to talk about.
Yeah, it'll be interesting too, because I think the first Tigers spring training exhibition game is the 21st, at least against a major league team. I know a lot of these teams this week will, now that they're all down there in full, not just pitchers, catchers, everyone's down there. You'll see some teams play some local colleges and some true exhibition games. It's how we got to see Ben Verlander hit a home run off his brother the one year, JV, which he posted that the day after he signed back with Detroit. He goes, this lives rent-free forever. But, you got the World Baseball Classic coming up too. So Tarik Skubal and some other key players and other teams are going to spend maybe a week, if that, at spring training. And then they're going to different areas of the country or internationally to prepare for, the first round of pool play for WBC. But Skubal is going to do Skubal things. So that's not really a highlight for spring training. It's just like, okay, what's he working on? But it's going to be the focus on the guys that you just mentioned, and the others that were given spring training invites, Max Anderson, Max Clark, McGonigal. It's really going to be interesting, because if they're going to spend on pitching, then the way that they would counter, if they're going to be a true like micro mid payroll kind of team market wise, and Young pans out, like a nice lefty righty combo with Torkelson, and they give, let's just say they give Tork a 2-3 year extension at the end of his team control, his rookie deal, and it ends up being a value play. Well, you got him and Young making, his rookie deal. And you still have Colt, who's at $6 million a year or whatever it was, 5 for 6 years, 6 for 5 for the next 2 years. Now you can go pay Carey, Riley. You've got that money that you would have had to pay your corner infield, but that's also something that's going to pan out. So that's kind of think the long-term 2-3 year plan that they're kind of hoping that it kind of comes out to. But yeah, I think those guys, and obviously the ones that have been talked about to death since middle of last year on their run. But I think one that's really going to be key, because some people kind of already have seen his name get thrown in mock trades. This guy we just drafted the other year and had a hot start for. He absolutely had a horrific shoulder injury diving back into first base, and Bryce Renier. I think he is going to come back with a vengeance this year, and he's going to put himself back up on that prospect map, top 100 by the end of the year. That's just my opinion, because all the focus is going to be on the other guys that we've mentioned, and nationally too, not even just us, but Baseball America and other guys that have him ranked. So I'm interested to see Renier, because he seems to be the only true shortstop that they have per se. But yeah, I think
McGonigal's kind of McGonigal's kind of a fringe guy, but.
Yeah, because they're going to say he might be second base, which kind of makes sense. You're going to anticipate Gleyber not coming back. You're certainly not going to pay him $20 million again after this year. But then if Colt does stay at third, then that opens second to move that max over. So now you've got first, second, and third pretty much locked up. Whereas this year right now, third and first are fairly open. To your point, Colt will play most of third. Zach, I'm sure, will get a decent amount, and I would expect to see Javi there a little bit too, if he's not needed in center field as much this year.
Yep, and he's already been taking reps out in center field. That was something that I saw. So they definitely plan to use him more than likely against lefties when Parker needs a day off. But to your point about Bryce Renier, I also saw somebody kind of like, can we get some type of, he hasn't been pictured yet, or, he's not a big social media guy. So everybody is kind of curious as to how he's recovered from that. But yeah, he was certainly a highly touted shortstop, and he's still ranked pretty high amongst people that, obviously aren't considering last year, because he didn't play very much of last year. But lastly, the World Baseball Classic. We have a lot of representatives. I think Riley Green, I don't know if he turned down Puerto Rico. I don't know.
He wasn't selected.
He wasn't selected for Puerto Rico, and then he was up for discussion, but they ended up going with Roman Anthony. But we also have Jahmai Jones, I think, is representing Korea. I think his mom is Korean. We have Hyu Lee, who's representing Taiwan. So those are some of the guys that you don't think of off the bat, but they are representing their respective countries. And then, of course, Skubal. Who else? Is there anybody else besides Skubal, Jones, and Lee that you can think of?
Well, there is one that's a commenter, but he's banned this year because of his failed marijuana test.
Right. Yeah, never mind. Yeah, that's why I didn't think of Javi, because Javi is not.
He would have been for sure, just locker room only. He would have been out there just sipping beers like Castellanos after getting pulled for defensive replacement. They're a little more. WBC's kind of a little more like the Olympics, or an international, like a true international committee tournament. They kind of obviously they don't really are too kind to those types of things. So yeah, but frankly, that's fine. Javi's been in 3 baseball classics in the last 8-9 years. But yeah, it's always an honor to play for a country, or a country that has heritage tied to your family. So you just hope these guys, as we're seeing the Olympics right now, you just hope that these guys get in, get out in one piece. That for the parent clubs in Major League Baseball, that's all they care about. But we know for sure behind the scenes, there will be some limitations and caps on some of these truly elite players in their position for sure. And I would expect Skubal, given the fact that he doesn't have a long-term deal, is probably going to be also in that same boat in terms of imposed restrictions by Chris Ilitch.
Yeah, and you know what? I think Kenley Jansen is playing. Oh, the Netherlands, which is because they're a Curacao is a territory, whatever the terminology is, but yeah, so he'll be representing Curacao. Let's get to the last break, and then we're gonna touch on some things that are going on around the league. All right. So this year is the first year that they will be trying out the ABS system, which originally I think the first time they utilized it was during spring training, and then AAA, the AAA utilized it last year, that level. But what are your first and foremost, and I think we've probably talked about this at least once before, but how does that system work? How often do they get a chance to utilize it, and how do you see it changing over time?
You know, at the end of the day, it's about getting calls right, and I know there's always outliers. Certain umpires have been absolutely horrific, and it's been well noted. But for the most part, a lot of we saw a damn near perfect game in the playoffs just last year. And in the World Series before last, we did see a perfect game called. All balls and strikes that were called were true to those original calls. So it will only help the accuracy of that. And considering how fast that turnaround is, you're talking under 10 seconds. It's almost no wait time for that thing to process, put the image up, and render its final decision on the appeal. But there was the quote from Chris Sale, who said he's not challenging anything. He goes, "That's their job. I'm a pitcher. If my catcher is really, hot and bothered by something, he's got the autonomy to do it himself. But I'm never going to challenge personally, just because me and every pitcher's mind, we think every call is our call. So that would put me in a bad spot if I'm constantly having to challenge and losing. Then it defeats the purpose." But yeah, it'll be the minor leagues have been using it over the last couple of years, kind of growing between low level, AA, and then growing all the way through AAA for working on all the bugs, making any changes and things like they need to in that regard. But in terms of structure and how it's going to be used for this year, each team, I think it's going to get one. I think it's one per inning. From a pitching standpoint, defensively, I think the same goes for offense. You get one, and if you win it, I'm not sure if you keep it for that inning. I would imagine you do, but they don't carry over. Like first inning to ninth, you don't get all of a sudden, all 9 to then use in the 9th inning. But if you go to extras, you do get one per inning every inning. So regardless of how many you have, you still only get one. So I think that'll be good for the game in terms of accuracy and getting calls right. And honestly, it'll help umpires and batters and catchers. If they thought something was one way and someone said, "Nah, I don't think it was," and it was the opposite, it retrains the brain and your hand-eye coordination to seeing a little bit more true balls and strike calls.
Yeah, and it should eliminate a lot of the, arguing and complaining because, who are you going to argue with? You can't argue with the umps anymore. It'll certainly single out folks that, tend to miss more calls, but ultimately, if the right call is made, you can't dispute with anybody outside of the system itself. Now, you think the system is flawed and there's some issues there, that's a whole nother level of politics. But yeah, ultimately we want it's to a point now, it's to a point nowadays where we're now trained to be like, well, just review it and call, so yeah, if they're getting the calls right, that can't hurt the game. That's for sure. But as we, free agency and all the trades and stuff like that, dwindles down because we're now in, we're now in spring training. It's time to kind of reflect on, the highs and lows and surprises of free agency and trades. Let's pull up the tracking here. Was there anything? Well, we can start with free agency wise. Is there any free agency acquisitions that jumped out at you specifically that you can think of?
I think in terms of free agency, it wasn't the player, it was the team that he ended up signing with, considering the original team that outside of his, at the time, the team that he ran in with the playoffs, I'll just say Bo Bichette was mine in terms of free. And that's not counting Fromber. I'm saying that without anything related to Detroit externally. So because he was linked to Detroit hot and heavy, and it looked like a good fit. It really did. I do wish that was the one offensive piece out of all of them that we were able to get. But and then the Phillies almost had a deal locked up, and then all of a sudden the Mets swooped in out of nowhere and got him for pretty good terms. And so I think him going to the Mets after the Phillies had him pretty much locked up to play. To sign with them was big for me. Obviously Fromber probably being the other one internally.
Yeah, for me, I mean, free agency wise, nothing. You hear a lot of reports. You never know, what the validity is. But Baltimore certainly was pretty active this past, was pretty active this past year. I mean, this past off season. So them going out and getting Pete Alonso was kind of an eye opener. They also went out and got another bat. Them trading for what's the Ward, whatever his name is, the corner outfielder. But yeah, that was Alonso was a pretty big splash, 5-year deal, and pulling him away from New York. So in that sense, it's also New York related, but yeah, I think that was a pretty big one, and it's going to make for a very rough, the AL East is going to be very competitive. Toronto obviously went to the World Series last year. The Yankees are always going to be in the mix. They pretty much are bringing back the same exact team, but Boston was pretty active as well. So yeah, it seems like Tampa is the clear last place team, but I feel like it's going to be a battle at the top of the AL East. Troy in the building, big season upcoming, he says. I agree. Trade wise, anything you can think of trade wise that jumped out at you? I mean, there was a lot of rumors. We knew that the Brewers were likely going to trade Diaz. Is that the last name? Edwin Diaz? No, Edwin Diaz came from
I think you're thinking Freddie Peralta.
Peralta, yeah.
That was late too. A lot of these trades were late that we're kind of talking about here the last couple of weeks, really. Yeah.
It definitely went in phases. MLB trades.
I think he went to was it the Mets or the Yankees? I definitely thought it was a New York team that he
Peralta went to New York, right? The Mets.
Yeah, it was one of the two. I figured it was probably the Yankees, considering Garrett Cole isn't going to be back for a little bit yet from his TJ or whatever major injury he had last year. But but that's the same thing what we did with JV basically when it was known internally that Olsen was basically non-existent for the year. But so is Peralta your surprise trade guy?
Well, I mean, we knew that the Brewers weren't going to pay him, so it wasn't. I won't say that that was all that surprising, but it certainly is an impactful. It certainly was an impactful one. Hey, okay, I think I found. Oh, maybe the Luis Robert one, just because he's been rumored to be traded damn near since they went to the World Series. So for them to finally shut the door on that one was pretty interesting to me. Um, you got Nolan Arenado. That was one that had been
Uh,
floated around for a while too. What are your thoughts?
He also had to open up that no trade movement. I mean, nothing was going to happen until he gave the okay. So I mean, he had full control of that. I think for me, the biggest one was just the other week. The third baseman, corner infielder for St. Louis, going out west.
Donovan.
To was it San Francisco or no Seattle?
Mm-hmm.
Seattle. I thought that was huge, considering who Seattle was not going to bring back that they had acquired either before the start of the season or at the trade deadline last year. Mostly being Eugenio Suarez, but because you look at the rotation, it's good. It's borderline great. They're younger, and that offense, obviously, as we saw in the ALCS, they can hit. And of course, they had some guys like Polanco that are no longer there. So I think that trade was needed to almost kind of keep them kind of similar to what they were last year. I don't think they'll be better. Cal's certainly going to have a year of regression. He ain't going to hit like that 2 years in a row. If he does, well, then I guess he's just the Scooble of catchers for 2 years straight.
Yeah. No, that was one of the last topics that we talked about, was how they're already in the power rankings as a number 3 team. And I was like, well, no Suarez, no Polanco, how are they going to, unless they bring Suarez back? Because at the time Suarez was still out there. I was like, how do you, I was trying to figure out how they could be, looked at as that impactful. And, of course, you talked about the pitching staff, which is a very strong pitching staff. And then I think 2 days later, because we did the show on the 1st, and as you can see, the 3rd was when the trade went through. They go out and get Brendan Donovan, who is a guy that he's a super utility guy. I think he'll certainly play third, because they went and traded Ben Williamson, who at the time was their everyday third baseman. Well, he was their everyday third baseman before Suarez got there. But now with him gone and Suarez gone, that's a wide open spot for Donovan to play. So that kind of rounds out and solidifies their lineup offensively and defensively. So I think that was definitely a good one. But yeah, how we got, I think our first game is Friday?
This weekend. Yeah, I think Friday 21st. They play the Yankees.
Did Robert play was he on the Sox team when they went to the World Series?
He's been around for a while. I mean, if anything,
did I make that up?
He was more famous for the kerfuffle with what's his face, Rougned Odor in the that fight. I think he was a part of that.
Robert?
Let me pull him up.
Hold on. When's the last time the White Sox went to the World
Series?
Series?
Yeah, I know he wasn't involved directly when that happened, but he was definitely. I thought he was on that team. Oh my God, a while ago.
So
he originally signed with them in 2017. So.
What am I thinking of? Okay, so they didn't go to the World Series.
Unless you're thinking of the Cubs World Series, Chicago would have been 2016, 17 with Javi and them.
Right. Yeah, he's like, when did Robert go?
I saw it too. But
a Cubs
it feels
fan.
like he's been there forever, because he's been talked about for the last 3 years about getting shipped out, basically. So, yeah. It makes sense.
No,
he's felt like he's been there longer than he was. You're all right. You're good.
What's the best team that he played for them? They've been to he's played in the playoffs.
Just right? Chicago. Just Chicago. He's only ever played for Chicago, at least in the major leagues. He signed 9 years ago, so he's only ever played for the White Sox.
Okay. No, I
don't.
But
do you have any do you have any predictions in terms of where the Tigers will finish, or how you see the AL shaping out between the 3 divisions? You gotta take a look at your crystal ball for us and let us know what you're thinking after 162 games.
No, I mean, I think that the addition to obviously Cleveland won the division last year. So essentially it still kind of runs through them. But I think the addition of Valdez pretty much solidifies us winning the division. barring something, ridiculous happening, offensively with, regression from Riley Green and Carpenter. And I don't really see that. I see the team being a lot deeper all around. You got rid of a couple guys that, I think you got rid of a couple guys that were kind of weighing us down. And a lot of our core guys are still in the primes of their career. So yeah, the pitching is going to be extreme. I think the pitching is going to be strong. There should be more run support to help them out as well. But as far as Framber Valdez, I think that he although he is 32, I think that what he does is going to play very well. He's been consistent. He's been pretty much in the double digits / teens win wise over the last couple of years. He's going to get a ton of, ground balls. It's hard. The hard contact has been kind of high as of late, but when you're keeping it on the ground, it can only hurt you so much. I looked at the Astro Stadium in comparison to Comerica. Now, surprisingly, the Houston's park is not a super hitter friendly park. The one thing that it did that you could see a pretty big disparity is in the home run department. And I'm sure that has something to do with the fact the warm weather and how it travels through the atmosphere and all that. So I think that is going to, although he keeps it on the ground for the most part anyways, the balls that do get in the air aren't going to travel in the same way as they did in the warm Houston air. So I think that's only going to help him. I think the only thing that's going to hold him back is if his infield can't, if his infield isn't as good defensively, that could hurt him in a way. So yeah, I expect Framber to continue the same progression that he's been on. Skubal is Skubal, and it's going to take a ton of pressure off Mize. Mize, you got Verlander there. Verlander's seen and done it all. He's very familiar with Detroit. He's very familiar with pitching in big games. So it takes a ton of pressure off a guy like Mize, who was an all-star last year, had the most wins on the team last year. And then you got Flaherty. Flaherty, don't know, you don't know what you're going to get with him. He's 2 years removed from a pretty strong season, but he's a workhorse. He pitched he took the ball on every outing that was asked of him and beyond into the playoffs. So not a bad fifth starter. If he can get anywhere near close to where he was in 2024, when he was traded to LA, that's going to be a damn good number 5. And then you got Melton, Montero, and Anderson, who could be number 6 guys or long relief. So hopefully the pitchers don't have to carry, don't have to carry too much. But we certainly have a nice resume of pitchers that have all-stars and MVPs. And I think Verlander was MVP one year of he
was year last year won Cy Young with us. He was also MVP that year, which was a year. It was a year or two before Miggy won the Triple Crown MVP. So we had 2 MVPs within a few years of each other.
Yeah, which is crazy to think of it. This was all in Detroit, but yeah, I think
at them heartstrings.
Right. So yeah, the Guardians. The Guardians are the Guardians. They're always going to be in the mix, but they haven't done anything that would make me think that, barring, even last year, had we not crumbled the way we did last year, they wouldn't even be a topic of conversation. So I think that we've done considerably more than everybody else in the division. The White Sox were probably the most active early on up until the very end, and then the Royals, they made a couple moves, but I think the Tigers, the objective 100% is to win a division and beyond at this point.
Yeah.
In a long answer.
Where do you see them finishing in the American League if you were to project that 162 game season with the other 2 wild cards and the division winners? Where do you see them finishing in comparison? at the end of the year heading into the playoffs. Obviously, if we're all in agreement, I think most of America is in agreement. Detroit went from a short favorite to a solid favorite. I wouldn't say runaway, but almost as close as you can get. If they had signed a bat, I think they would have been a runaway by far. But I think to your point, too, you mentioned Cleveland did addition by subtraction. They didn't really sign anyone, and they traded the other Naylor brother the other year to Seattle. But I think it's a combination to try and still be somewhat competitive without going through a total rebuild. Also considering what they just gave J-Ram, that extension. It's pretty much a lifelong extension to end his career as a Guardian. But, Kansas City's going to be a thorn. I miss me with Bobby Witt and Pascano, and we all know the ageless Salvador Perez had a pretty decent year for, a catcher with that kind of traction already expired in Major League Baseball. But, where do you see the Tigers finishing overall in the American League?
So I think right now we're pretty much neck and neck with the Mariners. They're pretty strong. They still have a strong rotation, and they made another addition to their lineup to cover for Suarez and Polanco. I think right now Toronto is still the best team is still the best team in the American League. But I put us ahead of New York right now. I put us ahead of Boston right now. I think they made a lot of moves to address their pitching staff, but we'll see how the young guys like Roman Anthony and some of these other guys do. But they did get rid of Devers and ultimately didn't make the playoffs kind of because of that. So the other you got Toronto, New York, Boston, and then Baltimore. I give us the edge pitching wise at this point. They're gonna be able to hit the ball. They got Alonso, they got, some, what's his name? Holiday, and I expect not Mayo. What's this guy? Gunnar Henderson.
Rutschman too.
Yeah. I expected some of those guys to have a turnaround season, but I don't think they have the pitching depth that we have at this point. So, I think our biggest competition is probably Toronto and Seattle right now.
It's like you read my mind.
New York. New York is New York. They're still they didn't make any adjustments this year. They just brought back Bellinger, and I think they brought
what a nice security blanket.
Not bad. Not a bad guy to bring back, but they certainly didn't add on to what was what they lacked, because Toronto had their number last year ultimately. So they didn't do Toronto made some moves, obviously. They went out and got Dylan Cease, and they got the guy from Japan. So they continue to build upon what they had going on, and New York kind of stayed put. So the big additions this year in the American League has been us with Jansen and Valdez, and re-upping with Finnegan. So I think that we're kind of in the driver's seat right now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I had my division. I had them in order. Seattle 1, us 2, and I only have Seattle 1 because of the benefit of, as you alluded to, the AL East is just going to beat the living crap out of each other unless something weird happens. I don't expect one or even two teams to really dominate that division. And heaven forbid if Tampa decides to, be a pain in their side and be a 75-win team in a division that might have potentially 3 legitimate playoff teams. And if Baltimore somehow catches fire, holy crap, you know what I mean? But Seattle 1, us 2, Toronto 3 because of the same reason. And then 2 of the wild cards being New York and Boston. Now I will say if the Yankees don't hit well, I think they fall out entirely because their pitching staff is still a little banged up. And, Yankee Stadium is not pitcher friendly in any way, shape, or form. So without good pitching or not without good hitting, they can't really take advantage of their own home ballpark, but that's still to be seen. So I got the Yankees, Red Sox, and the Rangers as the last wild card. I thought about Baltimore, and frankly, odds-on wise, Detroit is the 6th favorite AL team right now, which would be the last out of all potential eligible playoff teams, with Baltimore just ahead of us, and us being the divisional winner. So, but I think we'll end up dominating the division like we did last year. The White Sox will be a little bit better. You had a couple guys that kind of were a pain in our ass. We just have to take care of Kansas City. I expect Minnesota to decline, and I really expect Cleveland to decline. So from that standpoint, outside of the division, just be above 500 against the rest of the league. If you take care and you win 67, 70% of your division games or better, and you're 500 plus outside, that's really the baseline for it. So at that point, it's what they do at the deadline and their pitching staff. And you've just made a great point too. It's not just a rotation; their bullpen much better heading into this year game one than last year game one, with Jansen, Vest, and obviously Finnegan coming back, and still lurking there in Toledo, working things out after his collapse last year, is Bo Brisky. So
I was just about to say, I saw that he took his first, he took the mound for the first time since July against Live Hitting. So, if he was, 2 years ago, he was a pretty important high leverage guy amongst the levels of like the Vests and Foley and guys of that nature. So if he can, and he's got a very live arm, so I'll be curious to see if he, gets back to those upper, 90 speeds. But yeah, it'll be nice to have him back, in the mix of things as well. So, yeah, next time we record, we will have some actual results from a real life game. So I'm pretty pumped about that. But anything in particular that you're looking forward to before we get up out of here?
I want to see Kerry get more consistent at bats against lefties before we start just going back in the same old platoon thing. Got to see what he's capable of. I mean, it's just a small sample size. And down the stretch last year, we noted, I think in the last show, he did produce. So there's some recent history in limited fashion that says he can do it. So I'd like to see him at least start that way. And I think you could almost go the opposite with Parker, to your point about platooning with Javi against lefties. Parker just needs to just clear the mental block and just be like, okay, focus on the simple things, which is what he's really good at. Patience in the box, seeing pitches, and when he gets on base, wreaking havoc on the base path. That guy is long leg speed demon. And then 2 would be the progression of Colt. If he can get off to a good start and not a slow start, which has been his pattern last few years, I think that'll help buoy some of the offense and kind of calm that third base down if that's where he ends up mostly early on. But then you kind of wonder what happens with Zach and Matt Vierling going forward. Now all of a sudden they're kind of left without regular spots. And frankly, I think to your first base point, Vierling is a true triple emergency backup guy if something injury bug goes around, which he did spend a little bit at the end of the 04 season playing down the last week or two. And actually, I think he played first during Job's debut in that White Sox game. They've got good problems so far. Offensively, they just need to stay healthy. But some of the younger guys coming up will look good. But I think last thing, how would you construct your rotation with these 5 guys right now? Are you just going to stack all the talent to the top and go left, right? You become a little more predictable from a lineup standpoint from the opponent. Like, okay, these guys, Oppo, these guys the other way because it's that way. Personally, I'm alternating because that's what Hinch has done in his lineup. So I would go Skubal 1, obviously, Casey 2, Framber 3, and then whatever mix you want the rest of the way, righty. So it's keeping them off balance back and forth.
It's interesting because so rarely do you get 2 lefties of Skubal and Valdez's caliber in one rotation. I mean, I mean, I think you want to you want your two best pitchers to get the ball as much as they can. Obviously, Valdez is going to see a little less if you push him to that third spot. So, yeah, I mean, I think that if there's an advantage to be had splitting them up, by all means. But I mean, if Valdez out the gate is like, 5-0 with the 2.12 ERA, is like and on the flip side, Casey's struggling a little bit. It's like probably not a good idea to give Valdez the ball less in that instance. But it's an interesting predicament to have, and just only makes our team that much more dangerous. So because I think a lot of teams would have Framber Valdez as their ace. So for him to be a locked number 2 or less is an interesting situation to have. But I'm glad that we have that. We probably, if we had to put any type of money down, we probably wouldn't have put much on this being the case. But here we are.
Facts.
But that pretty much wraps it up. Subscribe to the channel. We're simulcasting on Bleachers to Speakers as well as on Corner to Copa. And once spring training starts, you'll probably get a lot more shorts in between with any updates as far as top performances. I'm not even going to speak on anything negative happening, but any breaking news that we have, we'll be keeping you guys up to date on it via the shorts on Corner to Copa. And we will be back real soon with another episode. Let's get up out of here.
It's warming up in the D, baby. Peace.
It is warming up. 50 degrees. Was it 50 degrees today?
50.
All right, we got it.
Get your lick back. If a nigga gon' do something, ain't no chit chat. Better stay up out the way, don't get your shit splat. Stop letting shit slide and get your lick.